Alright, so after finally finishing that barn for the pigs last time, I figured the next logical step is probably building an actual house for our character. Because right now we're basically living out of a shack. So today we're going to start working on that. And while we're doing all that, I'm going to read some Reddit stories. Let's get into the first story. Alright, this guy thought he was just talking to someone he met online, and then he found out something that completely changed the situation. I'm a 21-year-old guy, and this happened about a year ago. I still think about it almost every day. I met this girl online through a language exchange app. She was 24. We started talking because she wanted to improve her English, and I was bored one night and figured, why not? At first it was just normal stuff. Music, movies, dumb memes, time zone differences. But very quickly it became the kind of conversation where you're checking your phone constantly to see if they've replied. We started talking every single day. Not casually. I'm talking good morning texts, voice messages, late-night calls that go until 3 a.m. She would tell me about her day at work, complain about coworkers, send me pictures of her coffee, her dog, her outfits. It felt very intimate. At some point, it crossed that invisible line. She started saying things like, "I've never felt this understood before," and I'd say things like, "It feels like we've known each other forever." Looking back, I can see how obvious it was. About 3 months in, we admitted we had feelings for each other. We never officially labeled it, but it became romantic. Flirty messages. "I miss you," talking about meeting in person. She even mentioned how she wanted to travel anyway, and maybe she could come see me. I asked her at one point if she was seeing anyone. She said no. I didn't push further. That was probably my mistake. Fast forward about 6 months, she came to my city for a work trip. We met in person. It wasn't awkward. It felt normal. Comfortable. We held hands. We kissed. We spent the whole weekend together. It honestly felt like the beginning of something serious. After she left, things got weird. She started replying slower. Calls became less frequent. She'd disappear for entire evenings and say she fell asleep early. I tried not to overthink it. I didn't want to be insecure. Then one day, I got a message from an account I didn't recognize. It was a woman asking how I knew her sister. I froze. Apparently her sister had found messages between us. Romantic ones, and that's when I learned something that completely blindsided me. She was married. Not separated. Not complicated. Married for 3 years. I felt physically sick reading that message. I asked her directly, and at first she tried to deny it. Then she admitted it. She said her marriage was basically over and that they were emotionally distant. She said I made her feel alive again. That didn't make it better. I told her sister everything. Screenshots, calls, the weekend visit, all of it. Part of me felt like I was exposing her, betraying her trust. But another part of me felt like I had been manipulated into being part of something I never would have agreed to. A few days later, her husband messaged me. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten me. He just asked for the truth, and I gave it to him. I haven't heard from any of them since. I don't know if they divorced. I don't know if they worked it out. I don't know if I detonated a marriage that was already falling apart. But sometimes I sit there and think, if I had just blocked her quietly instead of telling everyone, maybe their lives would be different. I never would have gotten involved if I knew, but I still feel like I played a role in something bigger than I understood. Was I wrong for telling her husband everything? Or was that just the consequence of her decisions? Honestly, I feel really bad for this guy, but I don't think he did anything wrong. And again, I'm not some relationship expert or anything. I'm literally just a guy reading emails while playing a game. So take my opinion with a grain of salt. But from what you wrote, you didn't know she was married. If someone hides something that big from you, that's on them. Like, marriage is not a small detail to forget to mention. And when the husband asked you directly what happened, I think telling the truth was the right thing to do. It's not your responsibility to lie for someone who put you in that situation. If anything, the real problem here is that she started a relationship with someone else while she was still married. That being said, I totally understand why you feel guilty. Situations like this are messy and nobody walks away feeling great. But if you had stayed silent and he found out later, that probably would have felt even worse. So yeah, I don't think you're the villain here. You were just caught in something you didn't know about. Okay, this next email is about a wedding. And normally, wedding stories are either really sweet or really chaotic. And this one is definitely the second category. I'm a 27-year-old woman, and I got married about 6 months ago. What should have been the happiest day of my life has turned into something that's basically split my family in half. For some background, I have one older sister. She's 31. Growing up, we were never really close. She was always kind of the golden child. She got better grades, my parents bragged about her constantly, and whenever we argued, somehow I was always the one who ended up apologizing. I learned pretty early on that it was just easier to keep the peace. Things got better when we became adults. We didn't hang out all the time, but we were civil. We'd see each other at holidays, birthdays, family dinners. It was fine. About 2 years ago, I met my now husband. He's honestly one of the kindest people I've ever met. My parents loved him immediately. Even my sister seemed to get along with him really well. When we got engaged last year, everyone seemed excited. I asked my sister to be my maid of honor. In hindsight, that might have been my first mistake. The wedding planning process was stressful, but nothing unusual. The only thing that bothered me a little was how my sister kept making small comments. Stuff like criticizing my dress choice, or saying certain decorations looked cheap, or joking that the wedding would probably end in divorce anyway. I brushed it off as her being sarcastic. That's kind of her personality. The wedding day came and everything seemed to be going smoothly. The ceremony was beautiful. I honestly cried the entire time. But during the reception, something happened that completely changed everything. About halfway through the night, my sister stood up to give her maid of honor speech. At first, it sounded normal. She talked about our childhood, how we grew up together, how she hoped my husband knew what he was getting into. People laughed. Then the tone started to shift. She started talking about how I had always been jealous of her growing up. She said I was the type of person who needed constant validation. People were kind of awkwardly laughing because they thought it was a joke. Then she said something I will never forget. She said she hoped my husband knew what he was signing up for because I had a history of being dramatic and difficult. The room went completely quiet. My husband looked shocked. I was just sitting there frozen. Then she laughed and said she was just kidding, but the damage was already done. Later that night, I confronted her privately and asked what that speech was about. She acted like I was overreacting. She said everyone knew it was a joke, but it didn't feel like a joke. A few days later, I found out something even worse. Apparently, during the reception, she had also been telling several of my husband's friends that she didn't think our marriage would last. She even joked that he should call her if things go south. When I heard that, I was furious. I called her and told her I didn't want to see her for a while. She said I was being overly sensitive and that I needed to grow up. Then my parents got involved. Instead of defending me, they said I should forgive her because that's just how she is. They told me I was creating unnecessary drama and that families should stick together. So now here we are. My sister thinks I'm overreacting. My parents think I should apologize for making things awkward in the family. And I honestly don't know what to do anymore. I feel like one of the most important days of my life was overshadowed by someone who was supposed to support me. Am I wrong for wanting distance from my sister after this? Okay, this one honestly made me a little uncomfortable reading it, but that speech is really weird. Like, weddings are not the place to air out family grievances. Even if she thought it was funny, that kind of thing can genuinely embarrass someone. And the part where she was telling your husband's friends that the marriage might not last, that's honestly pretty disrespectful. I also find it strange that your parents are brushing it off like it's nothing. I get the whole family should forgive each other thing, but that doesn't mean you have to pretend something didn't hurt you. Wanting some distance after that seems pretty reasonable to me. I don't think you're crazy for feeling the way you do, but I'm curious what other people think, because family situations like this are always complicated. Alright, this next one is just painfully awkward. I actually had to pause reading it for a second, because the secondhand embarrassment was hitting pretty hard. I'm a 19-year-old guy, and this happened earlier this year at my university. It's honestly one of the most awkward experiences of my life, and I still cringe when I think about it. So for context, I had a huge crush on this girl in one of my classes. We had the same economics lecture, and we would sometimes walk out of class together. We weren't super close, but we had talked enough that I thought there might be some kind of interest there. Her name was Emma. Emma was the kind of person who was friendly with everyone. She'd laugh at your jokes, ask how your day was going, stuff like that. So over time, I started convincing myself that maybe she liked me too. My friends kept telling me I should just ask her out. For weeks, I kept chickening out. Eventually, I decided I was just going to do it. No overthinking. I'd ask her after class one day. The plan seemed simple. Our lecture hall is huge, like a couple hundred students. Emma usually sat about 4 rows in front of me with a few of her friends. I figured I'd just catch up to her after class and ask if she wanted to grab coffee sometime. That day, class ended and everyone started packing up. I grabbed my bag, walked down the steps, and saw someone standing near the door wearing the same jacket. Emma always wears same long brown hair, same height. I walked up behind her, tapped her shoulder, and just went for it. I said something like, "Hey, I know this might be random, but I've kind of liked you for a while and I was wondering if you'd want to go out sometime." She slowly turned around. It was not Emma, it was a completely different girl. And to make things worse, a bunch of people were standing around us trying to leave the lecture hall, so they all heard it. The girl just stared at me like I had completely lost my mind. Then she said, "I'm not Emma," at that exact moment. Emma walked up behind me. I turned around and she had heard everything. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I tried to explain what happened, but I was so embarrassed that I could barely get words out. The girl I accidentally confessed to just awkwardly laughed and said it was okay, but she looked extremely confused. Emma, on the other hand, looked like she didn't know whether to laugh or feel bad for me. I ended up just saying something like, "I'm so sorry, I thought you were someone else." And then I basically speed walked out of the building. I avoided both of them for the next 2 weeks. Eventually, Emma messaged me and said she thought the whole thing was funny and asked if I was okay because I looked like I was about to pass out when it happened. But now I don't even know what to do. Part of me still wants to ask her out properly, but another part of me feels like that moment permanently destroyed any chance I had. So now I'm stuck wondering if I should try again or just accept that I completely fumbled the most embarrassing situation of my life. Okay, first of all, I feel secondhand embarrassment just reading that. And again, I'm definitely not some dating expert. I'm literally just a guy reading emails while playing a game. But honestly, I don't think this is as bad as you think it is. If anything, it's actually kind of funny. Like, it's definitely awkward in the moment, but it's also the kind of story people laugh about later. And the fact that Emma messaged you afterwards and checked if you were okay is actually a pretty good sign. If she thought you were weird or creepy, she probably would have just ignored you. So if you still like her, I honestly think you should just lean into the situation and joke about it. Worst case scenario, she says no, and you move on, but right now it sounds like you're rejecting yourself before she even gets the chance to answer. Also, accidentally confessing to the wrong person in a crowded lecture hall is objectively brutal, so I respect that you survived that. Okay, this next one starts off pretty normal, but it slowly turns into something that's honestly a little creepy. I'm an 18-year-old woman, and this situation has honestly made me a little paranoid about social media. About a year ago, I was dating a guy in my class. It was my first serious relationship, and at first everything seemed normal. He was very affectionate, very attentive, and he wanted to spend a lot of time together. At the beginning, I thought it was sweet, but after a few months, it started to feel overwhelming. We had almost every class together at school, and he expected us to talk constantly outside of school too. If I didn't respond to his text within a few minutes, he would send multiple messages asking if I was ignoring him. He also started asking a lot of questions about who I was talking to, what posts I liked on Instagram, who I followed, stuff like that. It wasn't aggressive, but it felt controlling. Eventually I told him I needed some space. I said maybe we should take a break and just focus on school for a while. He did not take that well after that conversation. He started messaging me constantly. Long paragraphs, calls, emails. Sometimes he would text me 10 or 15 times in a row asking why I wasn't replying. At school, he looked exhausted all the time, like he wasn't sleeping. I started feeling guilty, even though I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. Eventually, I told him I thought it would be better if we just ended things completely. That made him even more upset. For the rest of the semester, he kept trying to talk to me. Sometimes he would show up where I was sitting during lunch. Sometimes he'd wait near my locker. It never became physical or threatening, but it was very uncomfortable after the school year ended. My parents helped me transfer to another school for my final year. I wanted a fresh start and honestly just wanted to feel normal again. For a while, things were quiet. Then about 6 months later, I got a follow request on Instagram from someone I didn't know. The account looked normal. A few photos, a normal name, some mutual followers from my old school. I accepted it. The person started messaging me. At first, it was casual conversation. They asked how I was doing, how my new school was, things like that. Over time, we actually became pretty close. We would talk almost every day. I told them about how stressful the school transfer had been, about my classes, about how awkward my previous relationship had been. They were always supportive. Eventually, I started thinking of them as one of my closest online friends. But then something weird started happening. I began getting follow requests from strange accounts with random usernames. Some had no photos. Some had only 1 or 2 posts. I ignored them at first, but they kept appearing. At one point, I blocked one of them, and Instagram gave me the option to block any other accounts created by that person. When I clicked it, something unexpected happened. The account of my online friend disappeared from my messages. It had been blocked automatically, which meant they were connected. I stared at my screen for a good minute trying to process what that meant. Then it hit me. The person I had been talking to for months, the person I had told everything to, was actually my ex. He had created a fake account to talk to me, which means he knew everything I had said about him, how uncomfortable he made me feel, how relieved I was when I switched schools. All of it. I immediately set all my social media to private and removed a lot of personal information. I haven't heard from him since, but the whole thing still makes my skin crawl. The idea that someone was pretending to be a completely different person just to stay in my life without me knowing is honestly terrifying. I don't even know if I should report it or just leave it alone, but it definitely changed the way I see people online. I am an 18-year-old woman. Okay, that one is honestly pretty disturbing, like, that takes a lot of effort. Creating fake accounts, keeping up a fake personality, having daily conversations, that's a pretty big level of obsession. I'm really glad nothing physical ever happened in this situation, but I completely understand why this would make you uncomfortable. If it were me, I would definitely keep all your accounts private for a while and be careful about what information you share online. And honestly, I think trusting your instincts in situations like this is important. If something feels off, it usually is. This next story is one of those situations where I genuinely don't know what the right answer is. It's about checking a partner's phone, which is always a messy situation. I am a 23-year-old woman, and I've been dating my boyfriend for about 2 years now. Up until recently, our relationship has honestly been really healthy. We rarely argue, we spend a lot of time together, and we've even talked about moving in together sometime next year. He's always been the type of person who values privacy, though. Not in a suspicious way, just in a everyone deserves their own space kind of way. We've never had each other's phone passwords or anything like that, and honestly, I never felt the need to. But about a month ago, something started to feel a little off. He wasn't acting completely different or anything dramatic like that. It was small things. He started putting his phone face down on the table a lot more often. Sometimes when he got messages, he would quickly turn the screen away. At first, I told myself I was overthinking it. Then one night we were watching a movie at his apartment, and he fell asleep on the couch. His phone was sitting right next to him. I kept telling myself not to do it, but eventually curiosity got the better of me. I picked up his phone. I knew the passcode because I had seen him unlock it 100 times before. The moment it unlocked, I immediately felt guilty, like I had crossed some invisible line. But at that point, I had already started. I went to his messages. Most of them were normal. Friends, coworkers, group chats. Then I saw a conversation pinned at the top. It was a girl's name I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped. I opened the conversation expecting the worst. But what I found wasn't exactly what I expected. There were no obvious romantic messages. No flirting, no I miss you or anything like that. But they were texting a lot, like a lot. Daily conversations, inside jokes, talking about their days. Sharing memes, it looked suspiciously like the kind of conversation you have when you're getting close to someone. I kept scrolling up through the messages. Eventually I found the part where they first started talking. It turns out they met at his gym about 3 months ago. She had asked him for help with a workout, and they started talking after that. At some point she even wrote something like, "Your girlfriend is lucky?" And he replied, "Yeah, she's great." Which honestly made me feel even more confused, because on one hand, nothing I saw was technically cheating. But on the other hand, it felt very emotional. Like the early stages of something. I put the phone back exactly where it was, and pretended nothing happened. The problem is that now, every time I see him texting, I wonder if it's her. And every time he says he's going to the gym, I wonder if he's meeting her. I also feel incredibly guilty for looking through his phone in the first place. He trusts me, and I violated that trust. So now I'm stuck in this weird situation where I know something that I technically shouldn't know. Part of me wants to confront him about it, but the other part of me feels like I've already done something wrong by looking in the first place. I honestly don't know what the right move is here. Okay, this one is tricky, and again, I'm definitely not some relationship expert. I'm literally just a guy reading emails while playing a game. But I can kind of see both sides here. On one hand, going through someone's phone without permission is obviously not great. Privacy is important in relationships, and I think most people would feel uncomfortable knowing their partner did that. But at the same time, the situation you described would probably make a lot of people uneasy. Even if the messages themselves weren't explicitly romantic, talking to someone every single day like that can definitely start to cross into emotional territory. I think the bigger issue here is that now you're stuck holding information that he doesn't know you have. That's a really uncomfortable position to be in. Personally, I think open communication usually solves more problems than silent suspicion. But I also understand why bringing it up might feel complicated since it involves admitting that you checked his phone. So yeah, this one's messy. I'm honestly curious what other people think about this situation. All right, this next email is about a workplace situation. And honestly, this is one of those moments where your brain reacts before you have time to stop it. I'm a 24-year-old guy, and I started my first full-time job about 8 months ago. It's a pretty normal office job at a marketing company. Nothing super exciting, but the people are generally nice, and it's been a good experience so far. When I first started, I was really nervous because it was my first real job after college. I didn't want to mess anything up or make a bad impression. My boss seemed pretty friendly at first. He's one of those managers who tries to be one of the guys. He jokes around a lot and sometimes overshares about his personal life. One of the things he mentioned pretty often was how much he loved his wife. He would talk about her cooking, their vacations, and how she supported him when he started his career. So everyone in the office had this impression that he was a very devoted husband. About 3 months into the job, I was working late one evening finishing up a project. Most of the office had already gone home, and there were only a few people left. At some point I got up to grab a coffee from the break room. That's when I saw something I probably wasn't supposed to see. My boss was standing near the elevator with a woman from another department. At first I thought they were just talking, then they kissed. Like very obviously not a friendly kind of kiss. The moment I walked around the corner, they both looked at me. It was one of those painfully silent moments where everyone just freezes. My boss kind of cleared his throat and said something like, "Oh hey, burning the midnight oil too." I awkwardly nodded and pretended like I hadn't seen anything. After that night, he started acting a little strange around me. Nothing aggressive or threatening, just overly friendly. He would randomly stop by my desk and ask how things were going. Sometimes he'd compliment my work out of nowhere. It honestly felt like he was trying a little too hard to keep things normal. I never told anyone what I saw because it didn't feel like my place to get involved in someone else's personal life. Everything stayed normal for a while. Then about a month later we had one of those big team meetings where everyone in the department gets together. Near the end of the meeting, my boss started talking about the importance of professionalism and maintaining a good company image. He made a comment about how everyone should represent the company with integrity both inside and outside the office. And without thinking I laughed, not loudly, just one of those quick snort laughs you do when something feels ironic. Unfortunately, the room was completely silent when it happened. Everyone turned and looked at me. My boss stopped mid-sentence and asked if something was funny. I immediately realized what I had done. My brain started panicking. I tried to recover and said something like, "Oh, sorry, I just remembered something from earlier." But at that point, the moment was already awkward. My boss just stared at me for a second and then continued the meeting like nothing happened. But ever since that day, things have felt weird. He doesn't really talk to me anymore unless it's work-related, and I can't tell if he thinks I'm judging him or if he's worried that I might tell someone what I saw. I honestly never planned to say anything about it. But now every time we're in the same room, it feels like there's this unspoken tension. Did I accidentally make my work life awkward forever?
Okay, this one made me laugh a little bit. Sometimes when something feels ironic, your brain just reacts before you can stop it. I also don't think you did anything wrong here. You didn't expose him, you didn't tell anyone what you saw, and you weren't trying to embarrass him. It just happened to be one of those awkward moments where your brain connects the dots a little too fast. That being said, I can definitely understand why things might feel uncomfortable now. From his perspective, he probably knows that you saw something personal and he might just feel weird about it. But honestly, as long as you keep things professional and don't bring it up, there's a good chance it'll just fade away over time. Workplaces are full of awkward moments like this. Okay, this next one is about a family dinner that went from completely normal to extremely awkward in about 10 seconds. I'm a 22-year-old woman, and this happened a few months ago during a family dinner. It still feels extremely awkward whenever I think about it. For some background, my family has always been pretty close. We have dinner together almost every Sunday at my parents' house. My grandparents usually come, my aunt and uncle sometimes join, and it's just one of those routines we've always had. Growing up, I always thought our family was pretty normal. My parents have been married for over 25 years. They've always seemed happy together. My dad is pretty quiet, my mom is the one who usually keeps conversations going, and family gatherings are usually pretty relaxed. About 6 months ago, my cousin brought her new boyfriend to one of these dinners for the first time. Everyone was asking him the usual questions: where he worked, how they met, that kind of thing. At some point, the conversation shifted to how long everyone had been together with their partners. My aunt mentioned that she and her husband had been together for almost 30 years. Then my cousin jokingly asked my parents how they met. My mom laughed and said they met through mutual friends when they were younger. And without thinking, I said something that apparently I wasn't supposed to say. I said, "Wait, I thought you met because of Uncle David." The moment the words left my mouth, the entire table went silent. My mom immediately looked at me like I had just said something terrible. My dad slowly put down his fork. My cousin looked confused. My aunt just stared at the table. I had absolutely no idea what was happening. Then my mom quickly said something like, "Oh, she's just remembering it wrong," and tried to change the subject. But the mood had already changed. Dinner became extremely quiet after that. Later that night, after everyone left, my mom asked me where I had heard that. Apparently, when I was younger, I overheard part of a conversation between her and my aunt about how my dad originally met her, because he was friends with someone she had dated before. That someone was my uncle, which means my mom and my uncle dated briefly before she met my dad. I guess it was something the older generation in the family always knew, but it was never really talked about openly. My cousin apparently had no idea about any of that. My mom told me it wasn't a big deal, but she wished I hadn't mentioned it because it made things awkward. Now, every time there's a family dinner, my cousin occasionally brings it up jokingly, and my uncle just awkwardly laughs. I genuinely didn't know it was some kind of family secret. But now I feel like I accidentally opened a door that probably should have stayed closed. Did I mess up by mentioning it? Okay, this one is honestly kind of funny, but also pretty awkward. You didn't reveal the secret on purpose. You just mentioned something you thought everyone already knew. And honestly, family histories are weird like that. A lot of older relatives have stories or past relationships that just never get talked about. I think the only reason it felt like such a big moment is because it caught everyone off guard. But from what you described, it doesn't sound like you exposed anything super dramatic, just something that people probably hadn't thought about in a long time. So yeah, definitely awkward in the moment, but I wouldn't beat yourself up about it too much.
Alright, this story actually surprised me a little when I read it. At first, it seems like a pretty straightforward situation.
But the ending changes the whole thing. I am a 23-year-old guy, and I've been living with my roommate for about a year now. We met through mutual friends and ended up renting an apartment together because it was cheaper than living alone. For the most part, things have been pretty good. We're not best friends or anything, but we get along well enough. We split rent evenly, we take turns cleaning the kitchen, and we mostly just do our own thing. But about 2 months ago, something strange started happening. Small things in the apartment started going missing. At first, it was stuff that didn't seem like a big deal. A couple snacks from the kitchen, a bottle of soda I had bought, sometimes leftovers I had saved in the fridge. I figured maybe I had just forgotten about them, or maybe he ate them and forgot to mention it. It wasn't really worth arguing about. But then other things started disappearing. One night I noticed that a phone charger from my desk was gone. A few days later, one of my hoodies disappeared from the living room. That's when I started getting suspicious. The only other person who had access to the apartment was my roommate. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I tried to ignore it for a while. But then one evening I got home from work and noticed that some cash I had left on my desk was missing. It wasn't a huge amount, maybe around 40, but it was enough to make me feel like something weird was going on. At that point I felt pretty certain my roommate was taking things. I spent the entire night debating whether I should confront him about it. The next day I finally decided to say something. When he got home, I asked if we could talk for a minute. I tried to keep the conversation calm, but I basically told him that things had been going missing and asked if he knew anything about it. The moment I said it, his entire expression changed. He looked shocked. Then he got really quiet. For a few seconds he just stood there staring at the floor. Then he said something I wasn't expecting at all. He asked if we could sit down. That's when he explained what had actually been happening. Apparently about 3 months ago he lost his job. He hadn't told anyone. Not his friends, not his parents, not even me. He said he was embarrassed and thought he'd find another job quickly. But it ended up taking much longer than he expected. During that time he was struggling to afford basic things. Food, gas, even groceries. The snacks and food he had taken were because he didn't have money for groceries that week. The hoodie he borrowed was because his jacket had torn, and he needed something warm and the cash. He admitted he had taken it because he needed gas to go to a job interview. When he finished explaining everything, he looked absolutely miserable. He kept apologizing and said he was planning to replace everything once he got another job. And honestly, I just sat there feeling awful. I had spent weeks assuming the worst about him, but at the same time he had been dealing with something really stressful completely alone. He actually did end up getting a new job about a week later. Since then, he's paid me back the money and even replaced some of the things he took, but the whole situation still feels strange. Part of me understands why he didn't want to tell anyone he lost his job. But another part of me feels like he should have just talked to me instead of secretly taking things. Now things between us are polite, but not quite the same. And I honestly don't know if I handled that situation the right way.
Okay, this one is honestly pretty complicated. And again, I'm definitely not some life coach or anything. I'm literally just a guy reading emails while playing a game, but I can kind of understand both sides here. On one hand, taking someone else's things without asking is obviously not okay. Even if someone is going through a tough time, that's still crossing a line. But at the same time, losing a job can be incredibly stressful and embarrassing, especially if you feel like you're supposed to have everything figured out as an adult. A lot of people struggle to admit when they're having financial problems, so while I don't think what he did was the right way to handle it, I can understand why he might have felt desperate. The fact that he eventually paid you back and apologized at least shows that he knew it was wrong. Situations like this are messy because there's not always a clear villain. Sometimes it's just two people dealing with a difficult situation in imperfect ways. Alright, this next one is about a situation that's honestly just a really awkward misunderstanding. The guy who wrote this thought he had a normal friendship with his coworker, but apparently everyone else around them thought something completely different was going on. I'm a 23-year-old guy, and I started working at a small electronics store about 7 months ago. It's not a huge place, maybe 10 employees total, so everyone ends up working together pretty closely. When I first started, one of the employees who helped train me was a girl named Emily. She was around my age and had been working there for a couple of years, so she basically knew how everything worked. During my first few shifts, she was really helpful. She showed me how to handle the register, how to deal with certain customers, and all the little tricks people pick up after working retail for a while. Naturally, we started talking a lot during our shifts. At first it was just work stuff, but over time we started joking around and talking about random things too. Music, movies, annoying customers, that kind of thing. Sometimes when the store was slow, we'd stand behind the counter and just talk for half an hour. I honestly thought we were just becoming friends. After a few weeks, we started taking lunch breaks around the same time. The food court in the mall is right outside the store, so we'd sometimes grab food together and sit there for a bit before going back to work. Again, from my perspective, it was just two coworkers hanging out. One thing I should probably mention is that Emily was naturally a very friendly person. She hugged people when they arrived at work, joked with everyone, and was generally pretty outgoing, so none of her behavior seemed unusual to me. About 3 months into the job, something strange happened. One of the other employees came up to me during a shift and asked how long Emily and I had been together. I thought he was joking. I laughed and said something like, "Together doing what?" He said, "Dating." I told him we definitely weren't dating. He looked surprised and said, "Oh, I thought you guys were a thing." I brushed it off and didn't think much of it. But then, over the next couple weeks, 2 more coworkers made similar comments. One even asked if we had met before working there because we seemed really comfortable around each other. That's when I started realizing people at work had built this entire narrative in their heads that Emily and I were secretly dating. I didn't think it mattered that much because it wasn't true. But eventually, the situation became more awkward than I expected. One day after work, a few of us went out for drinks. It was the first time most of the team had hung out together outside of work. At some point during the night, one of our coworkers jokingly said something like, "So when are you two going to make it official?" Everyone started laughing. Emily didn't laugh, she just looked at me. That's when I realized something felt off. Later that night, when most people had left, Emily asked if we could talk outside for a minute. We walked out to the parking lot, and she asked me something that completely caught me off guard. She asked why I had been telling people we weren't together. I was confused. I told her I hadn't said anything negative about her. I had just said we weren't dating. She looked genuinely surprised. Apparently, she had been under the impression that we were slowly becoming a couple. She said the lunches, the constant talking at work, the inside jokes, she thought it meant we were building towards something, and I just stood there feeling terrible because I genuinely had no idea she felt that way. From my perspective, we were just friendly coworkers. I tried to explain that I valued her as a friend, but I hadn't realized she thought it was something more. She nodded and said she understood, but I could tell she was embarrassed. Since that night, things at work have been different. We're still polite to each other, but the easy conversations and joking around are gone. We mostly just stick to work topics now. I honestly wish I had noticed earlier, so I could have avoided the misunderstanding. But at the same time, I don't know what signs I was supposed to see.
Honestly, this situation just sounds like a really unfortunate misunderstanding. And again, I'm not a relationship expert or anything. I'm literally just a guy reading emails while playing a game. But it sounds like the two of you interpreted the same interactions in completely different ways. From your perspective, it was normal, friendly behavior. From her perspective, it might have felt like the early stages of a relationship. Neither of those interpretations is automatically wrong, which is why situations like this can become awkward really quickly. I think the important thing here is that you handled it honestly and respectfully once you realized what was going on. Miscommunication happens all the time in relationships and friendships. It doesn't necessarily mean anyone had bad intentions. Okay, this one is about a workplace moment that I think most people would absolutely dread. It's one of those situations where you realize something at the worst possible time and your brain reacts before you have time to stop it. I'm a 25-year-old woman, and I work at a mid-sized accounting firm. I've been there for about a year and a half now. Overall, it's a pretty normal office environment. People are professional but also joke around a bit, and most of us get along fairly well. My boss is the kind of manager who tries really hard to seem approachable. He likes to make jokes during meetings and often says things like, "Our office is like a family." Sometimes it's a little cheesy, but it usually keeps the mood relaxed. About 3 months ago, we had a new employee join our department. She was transferred from another branch of the company. During her first week, my boss spent a lot of time helping her get settled in. At first, that didn't seem unusual. It's pretty normal for managers to help new employees adjust, but over time, a few people in the office started noticing something. My boss seemed to be spending an unusual amount of time around her desk. They would talk for long periods during the day, sometimes laughing about things that nobody else could hear. A couple coworkers joked that he had a favorite employee. I didn't think much of it at the time. Then one evening, I stayed late to finish some work. Most of the office had already left, and the lights were dimmed except for a few desks. At some point, I went to the break room to get coffee. As I was walking back, I passed one of the conference rooms. The door was slightly open. Inside the room, I saw my boss and the new employee sitting very close together. They were clearly flirting, like very obviously not just talking about spreadsheets. I immediately looked away and kept walking because it felt like something I shouldn't have seen. The next day at work, everything seemed normal, but about a week later, we had a big department meeting with around 20 people in the room. My boss was giving a presentation about professionalism and workplace boundaries, and I don't know what happened, but my brain suddenly remembered what I saw in the conference room. Right as he said the words professional boundaries, I accidentally laughed. Not a big laugh, just a short snort, but the room was completely silent at that moment. Everyone turned and looked at me. My boss paused mid-sentence and asked if something was funny. I panicked and said I had just remembered a joke from earlier, but the moment was already awkward. The meeting continued, but I could feel my face burning the entire time. Since then, my boss has been noticeably colder toward me. He's still professional, but he doesn't joke with me the way he used to. And I can't help wondering if he thinks I know something I shouldn't. Okay, this one made me laugh a little, but I can also imagine how uncomfortable that must have been. It sounds like you didn't actually do anything wrong.
Sometimes our brains connect things at the worst possible moment, and we react before we can stop ourselves. You didn't expose anything or accuse anyone of anything. It was just one of those awkward moments that happens in offices all the time. Hopefully, with enough time, it'll just fade away, and things will go back to normal. Alright, this next one starts off sounding a little suspicious. This guy noticed his roommate leaving the apartment every night at really strange hours, and he started wondering what was actually going on. I'm a 24-year-old guy, and I moved into a shared apartment about a year ago when I started a new job in a different city. Since I didn't know anyone there, I found a roommate through a housing website. The guy seemed normal enough, same age as me, steady job, quiet personality. When we first moved in together, things were completely normal. We weren't best friends or anything, but we'd occasionally watch TV together or talk about work. Most of the time, we just stayed in our own rooms. After about 2 months, though, I started noticing something strange. He would leave the apartment very late at night. I'm talking like midnight or sometimes even 1 a.m. At first I didn't think much about it because people have different schedules. Maybe he worked night shifts or something, but what made it weird was that he would come back only a few hours later. Sometimes around 3 or 4 in the morning, and every time he came back he looked exhausted. After a couple weeks of this, I started getting curious. One night I happened to be in the kitchen grabbing water when he came home, around 3 a.m. He looked surprised to see me awake. I jokingly asked where he was going so late every night. He hesitated for a second and then said he was just out driving. The answer felt a little odd, but I didn't want to pry. Still, the pattern kept happening. Leave late, return a few hours later, look completely drained. Eventually my imagination started running wild. I wondered if he was doing something illegal, or maybe dealing with something serious he didn't want to talk about. One night I decided to stay up and see where he went. When he left the apartment around midnight, I waited a few minutes and then followed him in my car. He drove about 10 minutes away to a hospital parking lot. I sat there confused for a while, trying to understand what he was doing. Eventually he got out of the car and walked inside. I felt immediately guilty for following him, so I drove back home. The next day I finally decided to just ask him directly what was going on. He went quiet for a moment and then told me the truth. Apparently his younger sister had been hospitalized for the past month with a serious illness. Their parents lived in another state and couldn't visit very often, so he had been going to the hospital every night after work to sit with her. He said he didn't talk about it much because he didn't want people feeling sorry for him. When he finished explaining everything, I felt like the worst person in the world. I had spent weeks imagining all kinds of weird scenarios about him. Meanwhile, he had been dealing with something incredibly stressful. Now every time I see him leaving late at night, I just quietly wish him a good evening. This one honestly made me feel a little bad for both of them. But I think this is a really good reminder of how easy it is to assume the worst when we don't know the full story. From the outside it looked suspicious, but once you understood what was actually happening, the whole situation made a lot more sense. Sometimes people are dealing with things privately that we know absolutely nothing about. Okay, this next one is about something that honestly could happen to almost anyone. It's about accidentally saying something you weren't supposed to say, and realizing a few seconds later that you might have just ruined something that took weeks to plan. I'm 22 years old and I've been part of the same friend group since high school. There are about 6 of us who stayed really close even after we all went to different colleges. One of those friends, I'll call her Megan, recently got engaged. Megan has always been the type of person who loves planning things. Birthdays, trips, dinners, holidays, she's always the one organizing everything. So when her fiancé proposed to her earlier this year, we all knew she was going to be incredibly excited about the whole wedding process. A few weeks after the engagement, her fiancé reached out to a few of us privately. He told us he wanted to plan a surprise engagement party for her. Not just a small dinner, but something where a bunch of her friends and family would show up unexpectedly. Apparently Megan had always joked that she wished someone would throw her a surprise party someday, so he wanted to actually make it happen. The plan was pretty simple. He booked a private room at a restaurant and invited around 20 people, close friends, a few cousins, and some coworkers. Everyone agreed to keep it a secret. The story Megan was told was that a small group of us were just meeting for dinner to celebrate the engagement. When she walked into the room, everyone else would already be there waiting. It honestly sounded like a really sweet idea. For about 3 weeks, we all worked together behind the scenes helping organize things. People coordinated travel plans, someone designed decorations. Another friend ordered a cake. There was even a group chat dedicated entirely to planning the surprise. The biggest rule in that group chat was obviously don't let Megan find out. Everything was going smoothly until the night before the party. The evening before the dinner, Megan texted me. She asked if I was excited for tomorrow. Now, because I had been in that planning group chat for weeks, my brain automatically associated tomorrow with the surprise party. So without thinking, I replied with something like, "Yeah, honestly, your fiancé has been planning this for forever." The moment I hit send, my stomach dropped. I realized what I had just done. Megan replied almost immediately. She asked what I meant. I stared at my phone for about 30 seconds trying to figure out how to undo what I had just said. Eventually, I tried to play it off. I told her I meant that her fiancé had been planning the dinner reservation for a while, but she wasn't convinced. She sent another message saying, "Wait, is something happening tomorrow?" At that point, I knew the surprise was basically ruined. I spent the next 10 minutes trying to downplay it, but she had clearly figured out that something was going on. The next day, we all met at the restaurant like planned. When Megan walked into the room and everyone yelled, "Surprise!" she smiled, but you could tell it wasn't the same reaction it would have been if she had truly been shocked. Later that night, she admitted she had suspected something after our text conversation. Thankfully, she wasn't upset with me. She said she still appreciated the effort everyone put into the party, but I still felt terrible. Her fiancé had spent weeks planning everything carefully, and I ruined the surprise in about 3 seconds because I didn't think before sending a message. Now, every time our friend group talks about surprises, someone inevitably brings up the time I accidentally spoiled an entire party.
Yeah, this one is painful in a very specific way. I think almost everyone has had a moment where they accidentally say something they weren't supposed to. Sometimes your brain just connects the dots too quickly, and your mouth or your phone sends the message before you stop yourself. It doesn't sound like you were trying to ruin anything. It was just one of those unfortunate slip-ups that happens in social situations. At least it sounds like everyone still had a good time at the party. And honestly, a slightly spoiled surprise is still better than no celebration at all. Alright, this last one is a little weird. It's one of those stories where nothing super dramatic happens, but the situation is strange enough that it sticks with you for a long time. I'm a 27-year-old woman, and I've lived in the same apartment building for about 2 years now. It's a fairly quiet building. Most of the residents keep to themselves, but you still recognize people when you pass them in the hallway or use the elevator. About a year ago, a new tenant moved into the apartment directly across from mine. He seemed like a pretty normal guy, probably around 30 years old. Quiet, polite, and generally kept to himself. We weren't friends or anything, but we would occasionally exchange quick conversations in the hallway. Sometimes we'd talk about random things like the weather or the building management being slow to fix things. He always seemed nice, just a little reserved. Over time, I started noticing that his schedule was a bit unusual. He often left his apartment late at night and came back very early in the morning. I assumed he probably worked some kind of night shift. That didn't seem that strange, but one night, something happened that stuck with me. I came home from work a little later than usual, around 10:30 p.m. As I walked down the hallway toward my apartment, I noticed that his door was slightly open, not wide open, just enough that you could see light coming from inside. At first I thought maybe he was taking out trash or grabbing something from the hallway. But as I got closer, I realized the apartment was completely quiet. I knocked lightly on the door. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. The TV inside was on and I could hear voices coming from it. I called his name just in case he was in another room. Nothing. The situation felt strange. Eventually I pushed the door open just enough to look inside and make sure everything was okay. The apartment looked normal, but it also looked like someone had left in a hurry. The lights were on. The TV was playing. There was a half-finished meal sitting on the table. A jacket was thrown over the back of a chair. It looked like someone had gotten up in the middle of dinner and never come back. I didn't want to invade his privacy, so I closed the door and went into my own apartment. I assumed he'd return later and everything would be fine. But the next morning when I left for work, his door was still slightly open. The TV was still on. The same dishes were still on the table. That's when I started feeling uneasy. Later that afternoon, I mentioned it to the building manager. He said he'd check on the apartment. A couple days later, I saw the building manager talking to 2 police officers in the hallway. They eventually went inside the apartment. Later that week, I learned that the tenant had apparently moved out suddenly. No notice. No explanation. According to the building manager, most of his belongings were gone. But nobody seemed to know exactly when he left or why. The apartment stayed empty for a few months before someone else moved in. To this day, I still have no idea what actually happened. Maybe there's a completely normal explanation. But the whole situation felt strange enough that I still think about it sometimes. Okay, this one definitely has a slightly creepy vibe. Situations like this always make your imagination run a little wild. There's probably a totally normal explanation. Maybe he had some kind of emergency and left quickly. Maybe he moved out suddenly for work. But when things happen in such an abrupt way, it's hard not to wonder what really happened. Sometimes the weirdest stories are the ones where you never actually get the full answer. Alright, I think that's all the stories I have for you today. Thanks to everyone who sent their stories in, and thanks to all of you for hanging out and listening while I slowly try to turn this ranch into something decent. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It really helps out a lot. And if you have your own story that you'd like me to read in a future video, you can send it to the email in the description. Anyway, that's it for today. I'm probably going to keep working on this ranch for a bit, but I'll see you in the next one.